Commercialization can start with a concept at Domi, and when it's ready to accelerate, can move to the fantastic facilities out at Innovation Park. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Michael Tetnowski.
Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate the accolades. Just to give some context on my background, I've been assisting companies with SBIRs and STTRs for about 17 years. And the SBIR program is the Great American Seed Fund provided by SBA, and it really provides 11 agencies an opportunity to find the innovations that are happening around the country with our small businesses. And before we really get into the main topic of NSF project pitch, I do want to give a little background on the total SBIR program. So SBIR stands for Small Business Innovative Research. And STTR, if you're working with universities or research institutions, is Small Business Tech Transfer Research. So that's what the acronym stands for. Most of us in the small business arena not associated with a university or research institution probably will be looking at SBIRs. So that's the main focus of what I wanted to talk about today. 11 federal agencies participate, and here's the big one. 3.7, and watch my lips, $billion annually for fiscal 2019 is spent on the SBIR STTR program. So it's gone up considerably in the last 5 years. It used to be 2.5 billion not too long ago, and probably 5 years ago it was 1.8 billion. But now it's $3.7 billion, and this is non-diluted funding, meaning that the government does not take your IP. The IP remains with the small business. Now, there's always exceptions, and sometimes if you're working with the military, there'll be joint IP that you must share, but the IP in most cases stays with the small business. And there's been about $50 billion expended since the program started in 1982 under Ronald Reagan, and it really moved along. The first funding was in 1983, and now here we are in 2020, $50 billion going to small business innovation research. Just to give you an idea of a couple of companies that you may recognize that came out of the SBIR program, Qualcomm was one, iRobot was another, Symantec was another, and the one I'm most proud about, because there's still a poster child for SBIRs, is a company called Ecovative Design, which was an incubator tenant of mine when I was up in New York at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And they really have made it big, and I won't belabor it on what they do, but if you get a chance, look at Ecovative Design. Quickly, there's 3 phases of SBIRs. They have a phase 1, which is a 6 to 12 month period of performance and up to, or I should say, average $150,000. If you know what you're doing, you can get up to $256,000. Phase 2 is about a 24-month period of performance, and the average is $1 million. That's where the big money comes in. And if you know what you're doing, it's up to $1.7 million. And then there's phase 3, which I think is a misnomer because that's non-government funding. So it's not part of the program yet. They call it phase 3. And that's when you go out for commercial capital through your venture capitalists, angels, traditional banking, any other way you can find it. So that sets up the story behind the 11 agencies. And what we're going to focus on is just NSF, because they did something rather unique late last year, and that's going to be the focus of this presentation. Now, before I go on to the actual presentation, this is also about local success stories. And what I wanted to do is bring on Manzer Redbrook Technology, a company that is doing some interesting things with rapid prototyping. And this is led by 2 FSU, FAMU engineering students They're still in school, and that's Patrick Manzer and Charlie Edbrook. And they're going to tell you their story about a recent NSF project pitch process. Now, typically we would do this after the presentation, but they have to go. So taking that into consideration because of their travel, I'm going to introduce Patrick Manzer, and he can tell you more about the process firsthand from a company that just went through it. Patrick, please.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. My name is Patrick Manzer. I'm here with Charlie Edbrook, and we're both students at FSU FAMU College of Engineering, just like you heard. We're both very busy and have a whole ton on our deck, but we had an idea for a company that we really wanted to pursue. We really wanted to try it out, and we were looking into different ways. An interesting challenge for us being college students is not just are we busy, but we don't exactly have many monetary resources available to us. So looking for funding that wouldn't dilute us too far in the early stages was very important to us. We found those through both college grants, and we are currently pursuing it and hoping for good results soon through this SBIR STTR seed fund program. And we started this about end of March, early April, and that's when we started our project pitch. Our idea at the time, and it's changed a little bit, but not too much, is the idea of a CNC milling machine that's more compact and expansive than the typical CNC machines that you would find on the market today. Through our research and through our brainstorming process, we found out that there was a significant market for it, but also a significant amount of research and development to get something that would work to the stages that we wanted it to work at. So before we started our application, we went through some customer validation and professional validation to see if this was both possible and a good idea. Together with those things, we found that this was worth pursuing, and so we started our actual application. If it's okay, I wanted to screen share. I don't know if it's possible right now. It's saying there we go. All right. So I just do this. There we go. Come on. I think it's this one. There we go. So this is basically what we were using for each of the different boxes that you have to check off in the project pitch. So I'm sure many of you who are interested in it have looked in it, but you have to go through 4 different boxes, filling out different details on what your idea is, your technical innovation, your technical goals through the first phase, your customer profile, and your background and status. So in this first one, we really discussed what we were trying to do, and we went very much so in depth. There's a limit to how long each section can be, and the limit for this first section is 500 words. We actually have our word count at the bottom, and you'll see it's very hard to get it, it's very hard to convey what you want to say in the space that you have. So you really have to focus on using this space effectively. And so that's what we did. We really went into technical detail in this section, talking about all of the different aspects that we wanted to include in it, all the different features. And this was, in my opinion, our strongest section. We discussed what we were trying to get to and how it would have a good impact on the economy and on the industries that we're trying to affect. In the second stage were our technical goals. And this, at the time, we had very ambitious goals. And as we went through the process after this, we found that maybe they were too ambitious, but it is okay to change it up after you submit this. So we had ambitious goals. We discussed what we wanted to get done and how we were going to get this product to market. After this was the customer profile. We discussed a little bit about our interviews, our customer interviews and validations, who we thought this product would affect, and if we think it would see success based on the research we've done. That's why before we started this, we wanted to do some customer validation And I'd strongly recommend you guys do that too. The last section was the background and status, and this is something that hopefully everyone knows today. It's about yourself, it's about your company, and it's about everything that you want to achieve as a business, your mission statement, everything like that. So that's the main application. I'm gonna go ahead and stop screen sharing now. How do I do this? Stop share. There we go. That's the main application process. After you have those boxes, you're happy with it, you're happy with everything you wrote, it's time to submit. But I wouldn't submit it right away. We actually sent it to a few different people with experience. I believe we sent it to you as well, Michael, who's a great resource to have for these things, and got it reviewed. If you submit it without anything, it can get declined and you'll just have to go through the process again, but you'll have to wait a bit per submission. I'm reading the rules right now, and it says you can do up to 2 project pitches per submission window, which means if we messed up this time and messed up again, we'd have to wait all the way until June. So really make sure that it's good and ready for submission before you submit it the first time. We got lucky, and they liked our idea, and they accepted us into the window, and that's where we're at right now, is our actual project submission, the whole process through the fast lane NSF proposal. We have always felt throughout this process, on a personal note, that we were a bit out of our league, that throughout all of this, we were fighting with people who are more experienced, who have done previous projects, who are holding doctorates in their respective fields with previous research. But what we've discovered is that through both confidence and having a very specific vision, you can achieve great things through this process, through the SBIR STTR seed fund. So having that vision, having that focus will get you very far. And then having support and help through other people like Michael Tentnowski, like the College of Entrepreneurship, the Jim Moran School at FSU, will really help you achieve great things and hopefully get the funding that you need for your company. At this point, if anyone has any questions or if you want me to add anything about it, feel free to ask.
Well, we appreciate it, Patrick. It's nice telling your story, and it's very good that you had a number of people reviewing it. As you said, it's very difficult to get it under the word count. Each section is, well, the first 2 are 500 words or less, and the last 2 are 250 words or less. So it's real tough to do everything in under 1,500 words. But congratulations, and it looks like you have a good project. And what we'll do is, I know that you do have to go. Actually, there is a chat question that just came in.
Yeah.
Maybe Harley can read it or you can respond.
So Attila asked, how meticulous are you with the process? Is it in effect like writing a paper? In a lot of ways it is, but I would say there needs to be a little bit of personality in the paper with the, or in the project pitch. With the actual project summary that you submit in the Fastlane guide and all of the different things that they need, it's a lot more professional and scientific, where you're removing the whole personality. But during this project pitch, one thing that we believe helped with our success is the fact that we brought our company's personality into it a little bit, of how we think it will be strong, on what we think are the things that will help with the business, help create it successfully, and all of that. Other than that, yes, it has to be all factual, but we did this in our idea phase. We had no prototypes. We had a very early CAD assembly, but it was, I think, 15 parts, and we're up to 50 at this point. So it's the vision for the product that you want to make. The vision for what you need this money for is what this is. And so that will deviate from writing a paper, or the process that you would writing a paper.
And actually, you brought up a good point. We're going to talk about it during the presentation as part of the program. But if you had a prototype, you're actually not at an advantage because they are funding research, and I'll get more into this, rather than engineering challenges, which would be a prototype to a commercially viable application. So the fact that you started off with something that needed research done in order to come up with a prototype is the way to go for the first phase one, and especially for the NSF project pitch. So good job. I don't see any other questions coming in. What I'd like to do then, thank you again, you guys, Patrick and Charlie. I wish you well and appreciate you sharing your story and taking the time to talk to us today.
Of course.
So we're gonna move on to the actual presentation. As you see in the agenda there, we're gonna wrap up the questions at the end. If you do have a question, and I notice it in the chat, I'm happy to do it, but I don't wanna stop because we may answer the question in one of the slides. So next, please. So a little history. I gave you a history of the SBIR program started in 1982. But what's interesting about SBIR as TTRs is you never could have a proposal that is unsolicited. So what I mean by that is you have an idea like the two gentlemen that we just heard from have, and you say, well, I'm going to send it to one of the 11 agencies. There's no mechanism for that prior to last year, late last year. So this is a brand new initiative from NSF only, by the way. The other 10 agencies do not do this yet. But I think because of the success of the project pitch, I think you're going to see more and more of those agencies move towards doing a project pitch concept. So again, no unsolicited proposals. You had to find a solicitation and be responsive to that solicitation with something that you were working on. And if you try to take something you were working on and try to fit it into the solicitation process, that really didn't go over too well. And if you're not responsive to the solicitation, you're not gonna get accepted. So NSF came out in March in theory. It was actually October, but I'll talk about that a bit more. They came out in March and they said, let's try this project pitch. And the idea was to give it a shot from March through December and see if they could streamline the process from applicants submitting a proposal and giving them feedback quickly. Because typically with an SBIR STTR project, you don't hear from them for 6 months minimum to 18 months. So it's very hard to plan for your advancement of your small business in that kind of a time frame. And I have several clients I'm working with that are still waiting just to hear about their SBIRs. So they did an online project pitch, and you just heard Patrick talk about the 4 sections, less than 1,500 words. And then you get an answer within 3 weeks. 3 weeks versus the 6 months to 18 months. So this all of a sudden accelerated the interest from not only NSF, but they do something called cross-agency referrals. If it's not right for them, they'll submit it to one of the other 10 agencies that participate in the SBIRs, and you may get an invite from one of them. So they said, okay, we're gonna leave it open full time. Now they've changed this 3 or 4 times, but it was any time during the pilot pitch. So from March to December. Next, please. So why did they want to do that? Well, they wanted to find out, because technology changes so quickly and their needs change quickly, they didn't want to wait either for the 6 to 18 months. And they wanted to find out if it's worthwhile for the companies to do a full-blown proposal. And I will tell you, the average proposal for SBIRs outside of the project pitch is about 120 pages and about 60 hours of work. So instead of making you go through all that, they said, let's do a quick pitch and give back comments so that they're not wasting their time and they're not wasting the time of the subject matter experts that are looking at proposals that don't meet the needs. So they're giving initial feedback before you have to do a full proposal. So why are they doing that? They want to see what kind of technologies are out there that have commercial or societal impacts. And so they're saying everything changes so quick, let's find it out really fast and give them feedback. And it involves a level of technical risk. In other words, they want to fund a theory, not an engineering advancement or a addition to something that's already out there. So they wanted greater flexibility and they didn't want to waste time, as I said. So if you get a project pitch submitted within 3 weeks, and sometimes it's as little as a week, you will get a favorable email or an unfavorable email. The favorable email says that you are now invited to submit a full proposal. Now that's something called lineage with NSF. NSF requires that you have lineage before you can apply for any grant. So whether it's SBIR or any of their other omnibus grant opportunities. So in order to get the lineage, there were only two ways. One, you could go through the NSF I-Corps program that's held around the country. We did one back in late last year with FAMU. So we did a mini I-Corps that gave lineage. And also, if you were part of a proposal of a previous grant team, you get lineage that way, but you cannot submit unless you have lineage. Now, the favorable invite from an email from NSF gives you that lineage. And then if you're not lucky enough to get an invite, they will give you feedback on why it's not an appropriate fit. And what I want to do with this presentation today is to help you meet the needs of what they're looking for and make sure that you're hitting all the key topics that the evaluators are looking for. So you're not taking a shot in the dark. You'll get some training here so that you can utilize that training for when you submit a pitch and hopefully have a very high rate of favorability. And in fact, what I like to tell people is in the short time that we've been doing this, Innovation Park has assisted 8 companies, and all 8 of those companies got an invite to submit a full proposal. So I'm kind of proud about what we're able to do and how we can appeal to the evaluators. Next, please. So a few things about eligibility, and then one just came up in the chat. You do have to be a for-profit company. A lot of times I'm talking to folks that are nonprofit, and unfortunately the nonprofit is not eligible not only for the project pitch, for any SBIR STTR program. So it's sponsored by the Small Business Administration. So they want to create small businesses that have innovation that the federal government agencies can utilize, but also for the greater good of society and for commercial application. So unfortunately, nonprofits are not eligible. And I just worked with a company that was a nonprofit, and they switched to a for-profit and submitted an NSF project pitch and just got accepted. That was a medical device company. So it was an interesting move that they could make, and they did it, and they got an invite to submit a full proposal. So the companies have to be less than 500 employees and located in the US. At least 50% of the company's equity must be owned by US citizens or permanent residents. By the way, something that changed recently is venture capitalists could not own part of the company, and now that's changed. They can have a portion of the company as a portfolio holding. So if you're working with a venture capitalist, it doesn't disqualify you for this program. All funded work needs to take place in the US, and that includes when you bring on consultants and or contractors. And then here's an interesting one. As the principal investigator, or the PI they call them, the tech lead, basically, you have to be employed by the small business at least 20 hours a week by the company seeking funding. And this is why I say this is interesting. I was working with someone, I won't say FSU, but a local higher education facility who won a $1.5 million phase 2 grant, but they weren't able to commit the full time necessary for the phase 2. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And so they had to decline $1.5 million. So you got to make sure that you're employed, number one, by the company seeking funding, and that you put in at least 20 hours a week by the company or for the company. Another thing that comes up quite often is what are the principal investigators' requirements as far as their education, as far as what kind of degrees or not they have, or subject matter experts. A PhD is not required, or any advanced degree. I worked with a couple of folks that were high school students but had a great idea. So no advanced degree is required. However, you have to have at least some expertise in the area in which you are applying for. And that'll be illustrated in the section that Patrick talked about, the 4th section, where you talk about the teams and their areas of expertise. Excuse me. And then here's the interesting one. To be eligible, the PI has to commit at least 1 month or 173 hours of work for each 6-month duration of the project. So what does that mean? If you got a 12-month project, which some of the agencies allow rather than 6 months, then you've got to put in, let's see, 2 times 173 is 346. You have to put in 346 hours minimum. And then if you get a phase 2, which is up to 24 months of performance, let's see if I can do that math, 692 hours. So there's a lot of hours that you need to commit, and some professorial or research scientists cannot take that time to do it. So make sure you have a co-PI or a PI that can commit that time towards the project. Next, please. So what are NSF needs? Hey, Bill Lixon, I lost my slides.
Laura, if you want to cue it up, please.
Sorry about that. Here it is.
No problem. I'll start to talk on it since I kind of know what, okay, well, there it is. So what does NSF look for when determining which companies to fund? And here's the key. It needs to be transformative. It should make a difference to the people worldwide, or it could revolutionize an industry. And Patrick and Charlie talked about a CNC machine that goes from a big footprint to a little footprint, and for cheaper. Everything's cheaper with their innovation. So that could revolutionize an industry. But I want you to focus on the second bullet point. It needs to be high risk. So it's unproven technology. That's what I was talking about without having a prototype. It needs to be a theory that you want to prove out. So the unproven technology that needs further testing, and of course they need the funding for that testing. Those guys were perfect. They're students still in school. They need the funding for further testing. And then as those guys talked about the market pull, there should be evidence that the product or service can meet an important unmet need for potential customers. So you have to do a bit of customer discovery and make sure that there's a need for that, and you'll articulate that in the 3rd section of the NSF project pitch form online. And then it should be scalable. It must make, or it should make, a large impact on the market or in the market. Next, please. So here's a couple of challenges, and this comes up quite often. There are 2 types of technical challenges. there's science problems, and that's the theory. Let's think about how we're going to solve COVID. Okay, well, now they're talking about making artificial antibodies and injecting the antibodies in people. That's a new way of thinking of a science problem. And then there's engineering problems. I have an application, I want to make it work, but the robotic arm doesn't work right. I need to put an extra tension on the spring. That's an engineering problem. So a science problem, as I said, is a new scientific principle, model, technique, method, or other innovation. An engineering problem uses existing techniques, models, and methods. So what NSF likes to do for phase one in this first NSF project pitch leading towards phase one is they want to see that it's feasible or not. If it's not, no harm, no foul. You don't get penalized for not achieving something in phase one. If you had a theory and it didn't work out, that's fine. You still kept the money. You still proved or disproved a theory, and you move on to the next one. I know one company locally in Tallahassee that's received 4 phase one SBIRs and 1 phase two. So out of the 4, 1 had merit and it moved on to phase 2. Now the engineering problems, I'm sorry, could you go back? I'll go on. The engineering problems are where you really think about phase 2. You've proved the theory and now you're moving on to the engineering aspects. That's what they fund where the big money comes in at up to 1.7 million in phase 2. So again, NSF is not interested in funding a proposal that has only an engineering problem in phase 1. So focus on the science problem. Next, please. So topic areas. I'm not going to read all these. You guys can read. I believe this is going to be online so people can refer back to this if you'd like. But as you look through the list, it's pretty general. Everything from robotics to wireless to energy to biomedical to advanced materials. And if your innovation doesn't fit one of these categories, you'll notice on the column to the right, about 4 down, you'll see other topics. And this is new for them. They said, you know what? We may not know what we don't know. So let's do an other topics, the OT category, and see what's out there. And maybe we can find some technology we were never thinking of and that has practical application based on the way that you submit your application and talk about the commercial application. So don't forget about the other topics. If you don't see your specialty here, you can still submit under other topics. Next, please. So Patrick talked about the key elements, and these are the headings again. The technology innovation, then the objectives and challenges, the market opportunities, and the company and the team. And you'll see, I mentioned this a couple times, but you have up to 500 words to describe these. And it is extremely difficult to do so, especially for scientists and engineers for that matter, because they really want to talk about the innovation, how wonderful it is. And that's great, and it is. But you have very limited space to describe that. And then you have half as many words to talk about the market opportunity and the company and team. So again, it should be focused on the R&D and technological work, not so much on the engineering aspect of it, although a lot of engineers get funded under NSF project pitch and also SBIRS TTR phase 1s. So those are the elements of the application. Excuse me. So next slide, please. So let's take them one at a time. Technology innovation. So it was great that Patrick showed you his actual wording. Of course, you couldn't read it all. I'm going to have one at the end of this that is another successful project pitch, and we'll really go into the various components there. But here's where you discuss the origins and why did you come up with this? Why is it unproven? And why does it have high impact? And really it needs to be revolutionary. And that goes back to that science challenge versus evolutionary, which goes back to an engineering challenge. So you really have to talk about, okay, here's where I think it's going to go, describe the innovation, and here's going to be the outcome. It's going to be a product, service, process, something that will be envisioned at the end of this path. And then again, and I can't say it enough, mention the science problem. That still needs to be proven. You can't already have a prototype. So even if you do, it's in the way that you word it so that you're looking at something brand new. In fact, one of our participants on this came across something that is the difference between science and the engineering challenge. And they had a product that had an engineering challenge and they were rejected. Now they're moving towards a second application, which has a science component to it. And I have a high confidence that that science problem will be funded. Next, please. So the objectives and challenges, and I know that's a lot of words here, and again, this will be available to you afterwards, but let me just talk about some of the things that really stand out here. Why will this help? Why will this technology help? How will it help the industry or individuals? How does this work that you're going to do make a new product, service, or process, like I said? How does it meet the definition of R&D? Don't assume that the reviewers know this. They are subject matter experts, but you really have to write it in a way that they understand it very simply, very quickly. They get hundreds of these things. So make sure you make their job easy for them. And then describe the specific goals that you have for the science problem and make sure that they're measurable. So you should be able to hit these goals. Because remember what I said, if it doesn't pan out and your theory isn't working, no harm, no foul, you kept the money, you move on to the next thing. Except your mission should be obviously for it to work out, but not so much in phase one. The whole purpose of the NSF project pitch is to get the invite for phase one. The whole purpose of phase two is to prove a theory and also to get the big money in phase two, up to 1.7 million, where you could really make a big difference in getting this thing to market. And then how do you reach these goals? Make sure that's all spelled out. And then provide the key tasks and talk about how each one of those can be measured in quantitative data. And then you can answer the question whether you reached your goals. Because again, you want to make sure you move into phase two, which is the big money. Next, please. In the market opportunity, you have 250 words or less. So describe the problem, and I like to say, what are the pain points? Why should anyone care? Well, because in the case of the two gentlemen earlier, they have a very large footprint for CNC machines. They want to make it smaller, maybe even a desktop, so they can do things quickly in rapid prototyping. So what are the pain points? And then you want to have those validated by the customers. So you'll talk about, I've talked to 100 customers. They all have similar pain points. And here's what the current solutions, I'm on point 3. Here's the current solutions, and they're not working because they're too big, they're too expensive. Something, point out the pain points. And then that brief profile of target customers. Is it going to be professors teaching a class? Is it going to be individuals making their own parts at home? What is the persona of the target customers? And then what are the market segments? This is kind of marketing 101. What's the marketing size? They call it the marketing universe. What's your addressable market? So you segment the market. And also, what's the initial target market? Remember, you're only going to have on average $150,000. So how do you hit that target market that you're addressing in the phase one? And then I talked about how you get lineage, and that's part of customer discovery. You can attend an I-Core class, or maybe you did without the lineage, maybe you interviewed 100 customers, as I said. And then make sure that the market opportunity is large enough and that the societal impact is important enough to justify NSF, your taxpayer dollars, and their investment in you. Next, please. So here's the last section, which talks about the company and team. So how long have you been around? What is your long-term goals? And I think Patrick mentioned the mission of the company. List everybody, full and part-timers. Describe the PI or principal investigators and their qualifications. Mention other key staff, pardon me, and anyone else who has experience in product development or fundraising, even if they're with a different company and they're just advising you. And then don't forget to include your business and commercialization advisors. Any kind of expertise that'll enhance your total package of your team is a more fundable opportunity for NSF. Next, please. So let's talk about once this is all done. Okay, we went over it quickly. I understand that. Patrick gave you an idea of what he did. 1,500 words isn't all that much. The hard part is getting it down to the appropriate sizes for each section. And he mentioned you can only submit one project pitch at a time, and you can actually submit 2 per submission window, which is listed below, but you have to wait for a response before you can submit another pitch. So remember I said when they first started that it was anytime, you can apply anytime during March to December 2019. Well, then they switched to 2 what they call submission windows, and now they've increased that to 4 submission windows. And basically, it's kind of silly. You can submit anytime because you can see they're continuous, with the exception in December, you cannot submit December 4th through December 17th. So as long as you're not the 4th or the 17th through the 17th of December, basically you could submit at any time. And the reason they have these windows is because when they do the cutoffs, they have to, by mandate now, have responded to that group in the submission window within that 3-month period. And you can see highlighted here, we're in the June to September submission window. So you need to get that invitation to submit, and then you have to, a lot of times they'll give you a rejection with consideration. They say, if you fix this, this, and this, we'll look at it again. And that's one of the companies, the medical device company, that fixed some of the things that they talked about in the application, and it was accepted. So you do have a opportunity to adjust your submission. Next, please. This is the actual form that you'll get started on. So if you just Google NSF project pitch, it's the first thing that'll come up is the page that you can click on for the submission. And this is just an idea of what you're looking at. It's a very simple online form. You put in general information, and then you move on to your 4 sections that were talked about. Next, please. Now, this is directly from their site. Once an invitation is received, register your company for free. Except I'm gonna say that from experience, I wouldn't do that. I would register right now. And I'll tell you why. First, you have to have your employer identification number, your EIN. And you may already have that, no big deal. Second, you have to go to the SBIR company registry to get a business concern control ID. So that's a small business concern, or the SBC ID. That only takes about 10 minutes, no big deal. Dun & Bradstreet, the DUNS number, it takes up to 5 days. And DUNS has been a little less responsive because the government is phasing them out as a private company at the end of this year. So it may take a little bit longer if they respond at all. And it's going to be replaced in the System for Awards Management, which is called SAM. And SAM is going to segue into SAMI, which is simply Systems for Award Management Managed ID, which takes over for DUNS, but it takes up to 3 weeks. So if you get an invitation, you're going to be ready to go with your full submission, except you've got to wait at a minimum 3 weeks and sometimes more to do all of these registrations. So if you're interested in getting any SBIR, whether it's NSF or not, I would go ahead and start right now on your registration process. They do not expire, so you can go and sometimes you have to recertify, but go ahead and get your numbers now, especially in SAM. That's the one that takes up a long time. And then with NSF, you have to go to research.gov and put in one more form, up to 48 hours for that. And then finally, before you can submit your full proposal, once you get an invitation, that's over something called Fast Lane with NSF. And they don't allow you to do any Fast Lane forms until all of the previous things are done and you have all of those handy. So your EIN, your SBC ID, your DUNS number, and your SAM, or soon to be SAMI number, and your research.gov identification you'll get. And then you can submit the full proposal. And there is a guide on the SBIR.gov website where you can look at the Fast Lane guide. And I would really take some time to look through that. And a lot of times people will say, well, why would I spend so much time doing this? The value is 3.7 billion non-dilutive funding, and you keep the IP. And once you've gone through this very daunting process, I'm not trying to minimize it, you'll have 80% of any other follow-up for new SBIRs that come out. Once you have that 80% done, it's a cut and paste. And now you just make it, shape it towards the actual solicitation that comes out from one of the agencies. So you can do this 6, 7, 10 times. It doesn't matter. You can submit as many as you want. You can't accept a number of different awards. You can only accept one during the award period, but you could submit as many as you like. So I think it's well worth it for non-dilutive funding. Excuse me. Next, please. So here's that sample application I talked about. This is an actual project that was submitted in September of last year, and this was on artificial intelligence. The project was accepted by the program director on October 19th, so they got it back quickly, and then the company got an invitation to submit a full proposal with NSF. So once you get that full proposal invitation, something that some folks don't realize is the invitation is valid for 1 year only. So it expired the following year, October 19th. So they still have time to do it. We're not into October yet. Next, please. And then technology innovation. Pardon me. So again, this is their application, and what I did is instead of having, like Patrick showed you, all those words on there, I pulled out the things that were most pertinent to this conversation. Again, must be 500 words or less. This happened to be 484 words, and it talks about the metadata. And what I highlighted here are the really interesting facts that they want to pop out when the reviewers look at this. 29% of digitation costs are with putting in manually the metadata. So almost 30% of the costs are just the manual input. And despite these costs, it's human error a lot of times. They're incomplete, inconsistent, and incorrect. Remember I talked about pain points, right? They're pointing out the pain points. So if you look at the fourth bullet, the project aims at significantly reducing the costs. And this happened to be a library and cultural heritage collection. So it's a lot of very mundane, very extensive data input. And then they introduce what their technology innovation is. They're using novel applications of soft computing techniques. Okay, I just kind of highlighted that. We didn't really dive down into what those are because the words would be too small, but that's what they're talking about. And then in the last couple of bullets, they just start talking about the various existing descriptions of the metadata and how it's done. And then it goes on to describe the whole taxonomy of the whole system. So that's the technology innovation of this application. Next, please. So this is the objectives and challenges. And again, this is just a review of what we already talked about, but I wanted you to see an exact example of it. So they're going to make evidence-based temporal predictions of items. Okay, that's how it's working. That's the objective. They're identifying items which have incorrect metadata labels. So they're talking about when they label these things. And again, I won't get into the specifics of the AI. And then they list the challenges and they talk about what they're going to do. They're going to acquire large databases. They're going to select a representative set. They're going to train membership functions for each of the selected attributes. So they go through the list and they pointed out very clearly when I pulled it out of the narrative from their actual application. And these are the things that jump out at a reviewer. Boom, 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 very easy. It makes my job as a reviewer easier. Next, please. So the steps are really defined. Now we're on to the fourth one, the market opportunity. So notice what I highlighted. The initial focus is on this because you go from the market universe to the addressable market through segmentation. And you want to say, okay, initially we're going to go here and then we're going to do this because they're funding the what? The theory now. So you can't say, hey, we're going to be the next Microsoft and everybody in the world's going to use us, right? You got to start at the initial focus. You only have 6 to 8 months to do it. You only have $150,000. So make it achievable. And then who are they after? They're after libraries, museums, and other archives and historical societies, right? So then they talk about, and this is very important, they talk about who's already doing it. Ever present, this is the second bullet, backstage library works. So citations are really important in doing your application. They want to know as reviewers that you know what the current industry looks like and who's doing what. So if there's already competitors, you want to talk about them, but then you want to talk about what you're doing better with your idea. And then they talk about the estimated number of CHOs in the US, what's that, 17,000 or so. And then, excuse me, and then they say, well, we really don't know what the total project expenditures are. It's unclear, however, so they turn a negative into a positive. Grants awarded by, and this is more the citations. So when someone asked, is this like a paper? If you're writing a scientific or engineering paper for a conference or for peer review, you always have citations. Where did you get your information? Are you making it up or are you citing the applicable sources? And here you see where they've cited some sources. And then they say this is the future, right, as they grow. Opportunities may also exist with international CHOs and blah, blah, blah. So you see where they went from here's what we're going to focus on. Here's the number of folks in there. So they've made it very clear who their addressable market is. And then, gee, I don't really know what the total is going to look like, but here's some citations on the annual expenditures. And then we're going to grow from there. Next, please. And then post submissions, and we're about to wrap up, but the post submissions. So you're going to find out, excuse me, and this, by the way, is for phase 1, after you've submitted and got invited. I guess I didn't preface that. You're going to have 1 to 3 months after the window closes for panel and merit reviews. Now, again, this is for full proposals, not for the project pitch. 1 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, and that's just for the panel and merit reviews. There's also something called administrative reviews. If you don't have key words in there, it gets kicked out and never goes to the subject matter experts. So that's a whole nother topic. I do a couple of seminars on SBIRs, and I can talk more about it in those. 4 to 6 months after the window closes, you'll get a notification. 5 to 6 months after the windows closes, that's when you'll get your money for your project if they accept your proposal, and it's up to $256,000. They say 150,000 is average, but there's ways you can bump that up, and that also I talk about in the full-blown SBIR seminars that I do. And then you have 8, and sometimes 6 really, but 8 to 24 months to complete the phase 1 project, depending on the funding agency. And again, there's 11. And then when you apply for phase 2 funding, which should be the sole focus of getting phase 1, and then basically it's a repeat of what was listed above, only this time you get up to $1 million, which is actually 1.7 if you know what you're doing. So I know I went over that rather quickly. I appreciate you listening to me. I'm getting hoarse, as you can tell, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna have some questions, but next slide, please. But I think what we'll do, in the interest of time and my voice, I want you to hear from our next speaker, excuse me, who will talk another story, and that'll give me time to breathe, and then we'll come back with the questions you may have, because maybe something that the next company will talk about might answer the question. So if that's okay with everyone, Bill, you're running the show. Is that amenable?
Yep, that works. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce the next company. It's called NewSci. It's a company that coincidentally focuses on using artificial intelligence, or AI, to transform the public safety, education, and social sectors. And who we're going to hear from is the co-founder and CEO of NewSci, David Lawson. And a little about David. David is a social entrepreneur, has been so for over 25 years. And he happens also to be the co-founder of Domi Station, your host for this seminar. So again, my voice is getting hoarse, so I'm going to let Dave talk about the rest of his story. But please, David, happy to have you, and thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you, Michael, and get some water.
I'm going to do that right now.
Exactly. Yeah, so what I want to focus on is we are literally in the experience right now, and focus a little on why we went for it and how it's working out for us. You know, I feel like interesting bookends. You know, the first folks that were talking, college students. You know, you may have guessed I'm not a college student, although there is adult learning. So clearly this is available for all ages. But I think another thing that's important is the fact that this is available to existing companies. And because I think a lot of it feels like it has to be a startup, and that's great. But actually you can be a company that has been around, but has an innovation that they want to do R&D on. And what happens is a lot of times companies can't afford to invest in innovation, and this gives them a way to do that, kind of create an R&D part within their company. So I would definitely say probably most of the folks listening today are more in the startup mode, but if there are people on the call today that have a company that's been around for a while, I think this is a great opportunity to introduce true innovation. So I'm going to just have a couple of slides that I wanted to share with you. So first thing that's important is our company, NewSci. Real quick background, because it is important for this. So we were founded in 2013. In 2014, we were one of the first companies allowed to use IBM Watson. We were really more of a big data company, so being able to bring lots of information together and grab insight. In about 2017, I really looked at AI, which, by the way, I consider that augmented intelligence, actually artificial intelligence that people talk about and is in the movies, you know, frankly, just doesn't exist. But augmented intelligence very, very much does. And so I set up NewSci Labs to be working on more experimental projects. And so while NewSci is absolutely the one that applied, it's because I, as a business, made that decision to set up more of a lab environment where it didn't have to be a product. You know, the normal things like, why would a company do this? There has to be it has to exist. I have to be able to sell it tomorrow. Otherwise, why am I doing this? I needed to have a longer term thinking. So our company, we focus in 4 main areas, and there's subsets of all this: natural language processing, semantic image segmentation, anomaly detection and recommender engines. There are also subsets of this. In our company, we have projects that use, I would say, I don't want to call them off the shelf, because one thing I will say about AI is we are at the beginning. It's mostly science. A lot of things that you see that seem like, oh, well, I can just take that off, often isn't really AI, or it's AI light. Most real projects are going to require at least some research and development. So we took one particular project that we had been working on, thinking we could use some more off-the-shelf pieces. It was to look at 911 calls and using natural language processing and to analyze them. But as we started to develop it, we realized that to realize the full vision of what we had in mind, there was going to have to be some very serious research. We feel very confident that we will succeed, but absolutely, we would really have to take a longer view to get where we wanted, even though we could now create, and we will be, kind of a light version using off the shelf. But the real innovation is what we put forward. So what we did last December, and I want to thank Michael for his help, only because of Domi, ironically, that I even knew that SBIR. Also shout out to Eric Graben, who has done a lot of work in this area and secured these sorts of what I really consider, it is investment, but I really consider almost really a grant, because I wasn't thinking of it. I wish I had known about this. I would have done it earlier. But that project pitch was great, because I was like, am I going to take my team who is doing work that we're getting paid for and say, I want you to do the heavy lift of this project? So having that pitch was really key. And so what we did, we submitted that in, I believe it was around December 12th. And literally, Happy New Year. Of course, right now, don't we all wish we could go back to 2019? We got accepted. So literally, while they give themselves 3 weeks, what is that? It's 17 days, 19 days. And we got an answer, and it was yes. Now, that I will say came with a little bit of a double-edged sword, because frankly, when I put it in there, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm always confident, but I was thinking, they'll probably say, no, you need to change this. I kind of underestimated both our team's ability to nail that pitch, because we just hadn't done it before, but also that our idea, which we had been around in our heads for a while, and sometimes you underestimate what was so compelling. So as soon as it came, we then registered with SAM. I totally agree with Michael. Do that now. It's a little bit of bureaucracy, but it's not a big deal. Go ahead and do it. Why not be in there, and then you're ready? We did it. Now, one thing that was good for us is because we were an existing company, we already had a DUNS number. We had a lot of the boxes checked. What we had thought we would do at that point, there was a opening in early February. And so we were like, hey, let's go. And So we pulled out all the stops in January, a lot of hard work. One of the areas that I'm not sure Michael touches much on, because I mean, boy, that was a lot of content to have to do in a short amount of time. He normally does, as he said, workshops, and highly recommend that you go. The budgeting of this really takes some work, and my operations person took lead on that. We did a lot of just a lot of work. What I will say is I'm so glad we did what we did. We said, you know, we're not going to go. We're not going to rush it, because for one thing, the budget really should come after you've done most of the work with your actual proposal. It shouldn't be the tail that wags the dog. So we stepped back, even though that cost us time, and we actually submitted our proposal in June. So we could have, and I could see where a company might, well, I really believe the pitch is going to happen, so I'm going to go ahead and start doing a lot of that full proposal work. Even though you can't do it in the system, you can still get a hold of the templates and you know what you need to do. But you know, it's pretty risky. You know, it's a matter of if you have the time. But I'm glad we waited, because it was a much better proposal in June, and the budget was better. But I'm glad we had that first one to work off of, but just it was a more compelling. Now we are anxiously waiting. I was hoping that this particular webinar might give us some, you know, some good karma, and I could tell you it closed today. But we'll hear definitely by September. So what's happening right now is that review is happening. They don't get to you during this process, so we know in the system that, you know, ours is pending, and things are happening behind the scenes, but you are not involved in any of that. So if they have like, boy, this looks good, but we really need X, that's going to have to be fixed after they would reject us, and then we'd have an opportunity to submit again. But hopefully we'll get it. If we do get it, we probably would not get any funding until at the earliest December. It might be January. We said in our proposal, they asked for a start time, and we said January to get going. So this is something else I'll say to all my fellow entrepreneurs. This is not quick money by any stretch of the imagination. So if you're looking for, boy, I need this funding in the next couple of months, this is not the path. But I think for a lot of companies that have come to me for mentorship, I look at, boy, if they had started this very early on, because don't miss this, they want novel ideas that need research, not a finished idea that you know everybody's going to buy. That, you know, if you're that far along, they don't want you. Then you should be talking to venture capitalists. You should be talking to other people. So I think this fits a really interesting need. We definitely, in our minds, are thinking of this as a, by the way, we went for the 256,000. That's another little tip too. Look at the money. You might think, well, you know, we could do it for 180. No, I think our budget was $255,000, you know, $837. No, spend it. So, you know, yeah, they're not going to give you any benefits for doing it on the cheap, because frankly, they want to see that you can put the team together. This is not going to fund everything. They're going to expect, I think, you to have some, you know, some other, you know, sources of funding. But Michael could say more about that. I don't think don't get me wrong, this could be most of what you have, but I think they're not going to want to feel like, you know, without, you know, these are the only dollars that you're going to have. So on the funding itself, so again, the 256,000, the up to 1.75. Now, we very much have already, in our minds, thought through this second phase. Now we'll still have to do, another thing that I want to point out, there is accountability in phase one, but not nearly at the level there is for phase two. So there'll be things like you need audited financials. They're really going to want to know that you are viable, because remember, there's no penalty for failure. If it wasn't for failure, science would never move forward. That is super important for everybody. Science is all about failure in order to succeed. But phase two, not so much. now it's more like, they'd like, let's say, the typical 2 or 3 out of 10 businesses that really make it. They're going to want that. So, we're thinking through that. We did get, you're able to submit recommendations, outside recommendations. We did one from the market we're going to serve. And then we did one from a technical expert, someone who has the authority to say we're capable of doing what we say we're going to do. So those were our bookends that we thought would be compelling to the reviewers. Again, get going with phase two as soon as that. You're going to go through a lengthy process. This no dilution, I can't say enough. The idea, most startups at best, you might have, let's say, a $2 million valuation. That $256,000 would be 10% of your business. And a lot of you would probably have to sell even more of your company, might be $1 million. Well, now it's 26% of your business. And plus you got an investor that is not going, it's okay if you fail. Okay, so that's the other thing. You get two things. They don't want any stock, and they understand the game you're playing. That is a very high stakes game. Now, want to be clear, what about for tax purposes? You treat this as operational revenue. So it's not, free, okay, in that sense. This will show up on your books. In our case, $256,000. It's called other income. And you think, oh, I got to pay taxes. Well, remember, we have counted against this all the expenses. So they do allow you, I want to say, and Michael can correct me, I think it's 7% that would be what you would call profit, or kind of, we're not sure how we'd spend it, but sort of for the business of being in business kind of thing. So they do allow an overhead piece. But bottom line, I would say this should be in the arsenal of any startup or any business that is working on true innovation, where either it's an existing company that is like, boy, I want to take a risk, but I can't put $250,000 of my profit from my business I'm in to design the business I want to be in. And so, or you're a startup where you have something that, in order for you to have a viable business, something's got to work that right now isn't working. So there's something you think, if you maybe miniaturize something or you do something better, but there's a chasm you've got to get over. I think this is a great way to do it. And I realize I'm an AI company, but I just think AI is perfectly suited for this, because most of AI is science. So if you're doing anything in our area, I think you're crazy not to take a look. And then I'm happy to answer questions, but back to you, Michael.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate your insight, having gone through this. And I know that you were talking primarily about SBIR phase one when you get the invite to submit that. And I do appreciate a couple of points you brought up. Good point on existing businesses. I didn't mean to imply you needed to be a startup. It's for any business under 500 employees and some of those eligibility requirements that are there. And I alluded to one local Tallahassee company that won 4 phase ones and 1 phase 2, and they've been in business probably 10 years. So certainly any company that meets the other eligibility requirements can apply. And one thing I do have to clarify, that 7% you talked about, which is called fee, but profit, you're right. It used to be 7 to 11%, but they're pretty much settling on 7 almost exclusively, all 11 agencies. But it is not, you mentioned overhead, it really isn't for your overhead. It is truly for your profit. Go on vacation, buy a new piece of equipment, do whatever you want. Because your overhead in your budget is addressed in the indirect costs. So you're not paying for the overhead for your company through that fee. That's truly profit, which is nice. They give you that opportunity. And a lot of people do not request it because they don't realize that it's there. But you should always look at that 7% fee. And one thing to address what you said about budget, it is very difficult, especially the first time. Once you get your template down, it's easy for future submissions. But I'm actually building a workshop on budgets. And so I'm going to be having that quite soon, probably in the next couple of months, finalized, so we can go through the budgeting process. Because a lot of small business people don't really understand it, and it can be quite daunting. So I'll open up the floor for questions for me or David. I'm happy to answer those. And let's see what we got here. There was 1 or 2 questions that I addressed by chat, but I did see there was a question earlier from Jalen. Does your company need to be a for-profit company? If I didn't say it earlier, yes, they do not fund any nonprofits. And then the second part of the question is, or technology driven to apply. And the interesting thing about technology is it's so broad. If you're using a computer, you might say you're in technology. So I worked with a company that does an innovative process for a polymer that is impregnated into some jewelry. So you might say, okay, that's a jewelry company. What does that have to do with technology? No, it actually has this proprietary mixture of a resin that hardens to a consistency that doesn't deteriorate after 100 years or whatever. And so that's technology. So it really, the answer to that, like a lawyer, is it depends. And so technology is very broad, and you should talk to someone in the know about SBIR, STTRs to see if it qualifies, regardless of whether you think it fits the definition of technology or not.
One thing I also want to point out, because we've gone through the full proposal, the pitch was, it was hard to get to the word count and that sort of thing, but that felt, pretty comfortable. The full proposal, we had pages of citations. You've got to realize these reviewers are going to have advanced degrees, right? And part of their job is to figure out if you can credibly get there. Because even if the idea is good, is the team. And so we spent a lot of time doing that. The other thing I will say, and maybe because I'm married to an English major, find yourself an English major, okay? Because there's a lot of poor grammar, borderline illiteracy, and especially the more technical you are, the more your prose could use some work. Because again, imagine they're reading many things, and it's just an easy way to go, these people aren't serious. They clearly didn't proofread this. I'm not saying it has to be a Hemingway novel, but I have an English major look at it, and frankly, find somebody who has no idea what you're talking about, but does know how to use a comma.
What about from participants? Any questions that haven't been addressed? I know it was a lot of material in a very short period of time, but we've got quite a while to answer some questions. So anything, it doesn't matter if it's on the NSF. If you have other questions about the other 10 agencies, I'm happy to answer those as well, or the whole SBIR program.
Yeah, I have a question, Michael, on the tech innovation part of the application.
Yeah.
So you talked about you want to talk about where the product goes, where you see the product going. So if you're addressing phase one, do you want to just talk about where the science will lead it, or do you also want to talk about the engineering, even though you're just going for phase one?
No, that's a good question, Attila. I appreciate you bringing that up. You definitely want to focus on the theory first, so the science side of the house, but you do want to put in the end game, which is commercialization. The whole reason SBIR, STTR exists is to get products out into the marketplace or for the betterment of mankind. So you want to mention it, and again, you do the market universe, then you do the segmentation, you do the addressable market. And so, yeah, you want to say, hey, look, here's my idea. Here's why I think it works. Here's why I'm qualified to do it. And if it works, here's the end game or the final application. And so you make it not the focus of this application, but you definitely have to address where it's going to go because of the betterment of society and their expectations of these products and services.
And,
So,
you know, Attila, along those lines, and Michael was very helpful with this, words really matter, like how you say things. And this was a challenge for us because we really see the end of this and we see the market very clearly. And it would have been easy for us to talk about it. If I was talking to an investor, I would have made it seem like it almost existed, right? But that's your job with investors, right? That's what crazy people like us do with visions. But this isn't what they want, right? This is a different conversation. We're going to have to do a lot of innovative thinking and a lot of R&D. If it works, then this, as opposed to we're already applying, because they're like, wait a minute. Then if you already have the answer, then this isn't research, right? So that's where experts like Michael, can really help you find that and find that voice, because it needs to be throughout, because they're going to catch you. Like you might have part of it that looks innovative, but then you go over to market and it's like, wait a minute, does this thing already exist? Do you already have a prototype? And now game over. So just, yeah, that's a fine line. It took me a lot because, you know, to say to somebody, this might not work. That's usually not something I would lead with an investor.
Yeah, those are good points. You definitely have to wordsmith the way you present it in that it is not done yet. Here's what I think is going to happen. So yeah, good point. Other questions? I don't see anything coming up on the chat. Either everyone dropped out or we've covered it all. Again, I realize it's a lot. It is recorded and it'll be available on the Domi website. And I think we're gonna have it on the Innovation Park website. So you can review it. Also, if any of you, we didn't put contact information, but if any of you want some slides that you can look at, I'm happy to send you the slides of this individually. I'll leave it up to Bill when he closes out to give you my information because it's too long, or I'll put it up on the screen. If there are no other questions, I'm going to send it back to Bill Lixon. And again, David, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Bill Lixon, again, the Executive Director of Domi Station, a local incubator in Tallahassee. Bill?
Thank you, Michael. This was a wonderful presentation, very detailed, very illuminating. So we appreciate you and Innovation Park. Thank you, David. Thank you to everyone who's attended today. We also want to thank the Small Business Administration for making this program available. And if you have comments, please send them directly to us. We want to hear from you. And once again, thank everyone. I want to thank everyone on behalf of our team for attending, and especially Michael Temnowski and Innovation Park. We value our collaboration and look forward to more events. And as Michael mentioned, they have workshops upcoming on SBIR, and we would recommend that you attend those workshops if you have a concept as detailed in this presentation that is answering a question driven by science. So thanks again. We appreciate you. And with that, we'll wrap up. And if you would like a copy of this recorded Zoom presentation, it will be available through Domi Station and through Innovation Park. So thanks again, and we'll see you at another Zoom meeting soon, I'm sure. Thanks, Michael.
And folks, thank you, Bill. I did put my email out on the chat, so take a look there if you want to get up with me. So thank you all. I very much enjoyed it, and I hope to hear from a bunch of you, and we get some of this money into our local economy. So thank you.